My name is Matthew Landauer. I'm one of the founders and the main developer behind OpenAustralia, which is a website I'm going to tell you a bit about. But first, kind of take a little detour. But obviously, the title is Data and Democracy, and it's about what happens when you take a whole lot of government data, mix it up with democracy, and the sorts of things that can happen from that. So this grumpy-looking guy, is Winston Churchill, who was the UK Prime Minister during the Second World War. And he had a very famous thing to say about democracy, where he said, it's been said that democracy is the very worst form of government, except all the others that have been tried. Now, democracy is a whole lot of things to a whole lot of people, but we need to remind ourselves about the true nature of democracy. And democracy isn't just what goes on in this building. You're probably familiar with this. It's the Federal Parliament in Canberra, and this is the House of Representatives without the people in it. And I guess we're all used to kind of pictures of, seeing debates go on in Parliament and maybe question time and that whole kind of theater. But, we need to remember that they're there representing us, right? And people, ordinary people, people like us, are there. They're there as the voice of us, basically. So we need to remember our role in all of this. And to do that, I'm going to just take a little sort of sidestep and look at the UK. As you're probably familiar, the system in Australia is very much modeled after the UK system. And I'm going to tell you a bit about the publishing of the proceedings of Parliament, which is called the Hansard. Now, if you go back to the 18th century, it's extraordinary to think, in today's terms, that it was actually illegal to publish what was said in Parliament. Like, you could be jailed for doing that. It was legal to report the results of the kind of discussions. So you could, there were publishers. They published, what the votes were and what bills got passed and that sort of thing. But to actually publish the debate was illegal. Now, the idea was that there was some, they needed that privacy to kind of allow that discussion to happen freely, and publishing it would somehow undermine that. Now, that sort of argument might remind you of some of the arguments that are going on now around freedom of information, similar sorts of things. But now, if we look at things now, it's pretty unthinkable to think that this situation ever existed. But people being people, they got around it, right? So they published these things called the Proceedings of the Lower Room of the Robin Hood Society, which was this completely fictional account of this fictional house that said these fictional things, but was really a thinly veiled, actual account of what happened. And this went on for some time, and I think there were a few kind of big court cases, and I think it all culminated in a court case in 1771 where after that point it was sort of tolerated. Like, I don't think it was specifically legalized at that point, but it was, I don't think people were being prosecuted. Now, move the clock forward, and I think at the beginning of the 20th century in the UK, the publication of the Proceedings of Parliament was officially taken over by Parliament itself. And in Australia, as far as I'm aware, it's always been the case that Australian Parliament has published those proceedings. So they're probably, initially they were always published in this book form. These are debates from the House of Representatives in 1941, I think. But time moves on, and not everybody has the ability to go to Canberra and look at these books. And thankfully, the Parliament House set up a website, and they put the Hansard online, which is great. And I'm not entirely sure when this actually happened, but those records go back to around 1981, roughly around then. Now, that's sort of the point at which kind of OpenAustralia joined the fray, and basically we saw what a group in the UK had done, a group called My Society, and they set up a website called They Work For You, which basically republishes the UK Hansard. And we were like very excited about this, and we wanted to bring that to Australia. So basically, we built on what they'd done. All the source code behind their site is open source, and we basically adapted it to Australia. I spent, I think, a week prototyping it. Like the company I was working for at the time in November 2007 had a charity leave scheme, and I could take the charity leave for a week to work on this thing. So I basically just kind of threw a very, very rough early version of the thing together, and that resulted in OpenAustralia. So the main difference between OpenAustralia and the original site is that it presents the same information, but in a much more kind of usable, easy to search, easy to keep up to date with kind of form. So you can do things like, you just put in your postcode and it will then tell you who your representative is, and then with one click you can get email updates of whenever they speak in Parliament. Sort of really simple, obvious kind of stuff that at the time was completely missing from the official website. Search works. It used to be that the search on Parliament House website was completely horrific, like unbearably bad. You couldn't find anything. It has improved since then, and I'll explain a little bit about that. And you can do kind of keyword searches. So if you're interested in a particular subject, be it environment or internet or whatever, you can get email updates for those kind of keywords. All pretty obvious stuff, right? But when you bring that to what gets said in Parliament, it kind of allows it completely changes the nature of how you engage with your elected representative, right? Because normally, right, there's a few different ways that you could find out what they're up to, right? You could listen, you could go to their website and read their press releases and see what they're proud of, right? Or you could read the newspapers or watch TV, and you'd probably not hear anything about your elected representative at all, right? So this is a way in which you can not only find out about what particular people are doing, but also kind of narrow it down to what your particular interests are. It's like, I kind of, yeah, it's obvious. So this is an example of a particular MP's page. So I put in my postcode. I live in the Blue Mountains, so Bob Debus comes up, and you get a few kind of facts about him. You can click and email me whenever he speaks. You can see his most recent speeches and some kind of biographical links off to things. And this is a kind of starting point, and this is also a place where you can actually read about the register of members' interests. So that tells you about any bank accounts that they have, gifts that they might have received, stuff like that. So the idea is to kind of over time, as more and more information becomes available, and we put more of that kind of stuff here. So there's also some kind of automatic stuff that's garnered from the speeches, like how often they've spoken in Parliament, which is kind of interesting. The kind of average reading age of their language that they use, which is surprisingly interesting. And there's little things in there to just kind of pique your interest and make you look a little deeper. So, because truth is that most people don't really know who their representative is, and don't really have any particular direct way to easily find out and learn anything that they'd be interested in learning about. Now, okay, so that's one thing, but I'm going to move on to another kind of probably really bigger reason that OpenAustralia is needed, and this relates to Google actually. Now, I've got this quote, right? I'm not going to tell you what it is, but you probably guessed it's something to do with Parliament and something to do with what a politician said. But yeah, so a global network of volunteers who develop the Ubuntu Linux system, right? I stick it into this thing, and I get some results. And there's only 5 of them. And the first one is actually, it's like nice self-referential thing, because I actually used this once in a talk before, so that's the first the first one. But after that, it's from Catherine King, and a link to OpenAustralia. So Catherine King is an MP, and she said that, and this is her website. and she's actually reprinted her speech on the website, which is actually pretty unusual. So you'd usually, if you did a random, search for a bit of text that was said in Parliament, you would probably not see the politician's website turn up. So the other link is the OpenAustralia one, and she's actually talking about a guy, I think it's the National Broadband Network, and she's talking about a guy working remotely on developing Linux, and that he needs high bandwidth. So that's why it's mentioned. But you've probably been paying attention, and the official source of this information, Parliament House, is actually completely missing from the search results. So the official source, online source, is not being indexed by Google. Now, I have no doubt whatsoever that's nothing to do with Google. It's to do with the way that they've set up their website. I haven't found a robots.txt file or anything that looks like they're intentionally stopping that stuff being spidered, but it just doesn't appear. You can do a search for just about anything that's said in Parliament, and it doesn't appear in search results. So that's a pretty poor situation, really. Considering that's the record of what politicians are saying on our behalf, and it's not appearing in Google searches or any searches for that matter, right? So what it means is you're completely limiting people's ability to discover things, right? Rather than going, ooh, I wonder what my politician is saying about X, rather they do a search on, I'm interested in finding out about, this person that's just died in an accident, in an industrial accident or something. And then they find out, then they should find out that it's actually been talked about in Parliament. But that would just never happen. So it's all, so I hope that they can fix this situation, like whatever they're doing wrong, like not having sitemaps, XML sitemaps, or whatever it is that's the trouble, whether, well, it could be any number of things. And it's not hard. You guys have made it really easy to make things searchable, so they need to do their bit. Now, you're probably wondering who is behind OpenAustralia apart from me. But basically, we're just a bunch of technology geeks, right? This is a sort of core group. We're all doing this in our own time. We're all volunteers. We're not being paid to do this. We're doing it because we think it's important, and it's important and it needs to be done well, really. A really key part of what we're doing is that it's totally nonpartisan, right? It's about providing information to people for people to make their own choices. Like we don't editorialize the information in any way. We don't manipulate it in a way that alters its meaning in any shape or form, right? It's all about presenting the information in its purest, true way. All the software that runs our website is open source, right? That's not just a pragmatic, yeah, we like open source, which we do, but it's actually a really key thing, right? We're about transparency. We're about saying, we need to know what government's doing. We need to know what politicians are saying, but people need to trust what we're doing. And the only way for us to really make what we're doing trustworthy is obviously we say the right words. We say yeah, we're nonpartisan, but people need to be able to look at the source code that runs the website and see that we're not doing anything fishy, right? So that's really, really key. Now, we need to make this stuff sustainable. Like right now, we're doing it unpaid. I'm probably spending far more time doing it than I really should, and on the level of being paid, that is. But one of the key things, I guess, to make this thing work for the long term, and it's important that this thing works for the long term, is that we actually set up a nonprofit and we try to get funding to kind of maintain this thing, and actually try to get a very small group of core paid developers together to maintain this thing and to build stuff for the future, because like what we've done right now is really just the beginning. Whole bunch of people to thank. These are some of the people that have contributed the code except for me, and our hosting is provided by a guy called Andrew Snow from Octopus Computing, who's basically got a machine on a rack in some sort of a room in Sydney, and he's given me a VPS on it, and so that's what we run our site off of. The biggest thanks, probably of all, goes to the people behind the UK site, They Work For You. And this is some of the people that contributed to that website over the course of like 4 or 5 years. And all the website code for OpenAustralia is built on They Work For You. We wrote the parser and scraper that takes all the government data off the website and puts it into the database. We wrote from scratch because that's obviously specific to Australia. So, you know, in many ways, what my society has done is set the benchmark for what is happening all over the world. You know, in the US, continuing to happen in the UK, happening here. You know, these people were doing it really the first. They Work For You started about 4 or 5 years ago now. Okay, so I'm going to talk about getting access to the data, which is really much harder than it ought to be, right? So that's just getting our dirty hands on the data from government. Then we've got the issue of actually getting permission to republish that data on our website, and that is also much harder than it ought to be. Now, when it comes to the original version of the screen scraper that wrote, this is the original version of the website. And we didn't have access to any of the underlying data. You know, we asked for it, nothing happened. The system that ran this thing was incredibly flaky. It would fall over every day virtually. It was like ASP.NET app of some description with cookies that are like ridiculous. And the navigation was entirely cookie-based as well, so you couldn't, was entirely session-based rather, so you couldn't there weren't any fixed URLs for anything. Anyway, it's just a world of horrificness. But kind of bashed something together. Now, then it came to permission, right? So we started working on this in November 2007 and had no idea how people would feel about us republishing this data, right? Because nothing, as far as I know, nothing like this has been done in Australia before. So just give you a little timeline of getting permission. First off, like at the bottom of the web page, it says, copyright Commonwealth of Australia. Like everything just says that, right? And so you're like, okay. So there was no indication of who we needed to get in touch with. So we kind of dug around, and after a while, we found out that there's an organization that specifically looks after Crown copyright stuff, and that's the Commonwealth Copyright Administration. So we got in touch with them in December. We didn't hear anything back. This is a sort of typical story for us getting in touch with government departments. We tried again in January, and then we got a response. So that was good. But they went, oh, it doesn't actually belong, it's not actually Copyright Commonwealth of Australia. It actually belongs to Parliament House. We're like, okay, so the fact that it said Copyright Commonwealth of Australia, no, it's Parliament House that owns the copyright. Okay, fine. So we got in touch with Parliament House. They directed us to the web manager, and then the web manager directed us to the web content section. And then the web content section person sent us a reply in an official kind of letter-headed letter that said, you do not require permission to reproduce Hansard extracts as the Hansard report is considered to be public domain material. Now, I'm no lawyer, but as far as I'm aware, Copyright Commonwealth of Australia, public domain, not the same thing. Considered to be, okay, well, basically we got permission, but I don't really know what it means, right? Like we've been given permission, but it doesn't really make much sense. We haven't been given a license that says, it's copyright us, but these are the terms under which you're allowed to use it. We've been given some kind of guidelines, like basically they saw the way that we link back to the original source. So for instance, when you go to any OpenAustralia debate, you'll see the text of a speech, and for every speech it will link back to the actual original place on aph.gov.au where that original speech was. So they saw that and they approved of that general format, but really other than that, there was no kind of specific license. Not great. Okay, so on to another bit, right? So you have where you live, which then you know your postcode. Postcode will then tell you what electoral division you're in, and the electoral division is basically like is like the area which representatives represent, basically. So they're kind of the area that the whole electoral system is split down the middle into these different sections, right? So each electoral division has one representative currently sitting. Now, so basically that's the kind of mapping. You need to go through that mapping to go from where you live to who your representative is, right? Now, that's a pretty fundamental piece of information in terms of the democratic process, right? But that middle bit, going from postcode to electoral division, is kept very tightly under control by the Australian Electoral Commission, right? Right now, you can go to their website and you can type in your postcode and it will give you your electoral division, but they won't give you that data for free, like the entire mapping, right? And that is fundamental to that mapping from where you live to who your representative is, right? So in some sense, they're actually controlling a very important part of the electoral process, which is who your representative. Sorry? No, but that would be interesting to see what would happen. The thing is, they do actually, you can actually buy that data from them for $400, right? But that wasn't an option for us. Is like $30 or something. Yeah. So it would be interesting. I don't know how that would work. So maybe that would be something to explore. But we found a way around it, and this makes the situation even slightly more farcical, which is that the geodata for the postcode boundaries is freely available from the post office off of their website. The electoral division geo boundaries, as far as I'm aware, are available from, I think, the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So you can combine those two data sets to make the postcode to electoral division mapping. And that's what someone did for us. Take two freely available data sets, combine them into one, and that's what we use to drive the stuff on our website. And since then, we've been contacted by about 3 different nonprofits to get that data, because it's like everybody needs it. Anyone who wants to run a campaign on their website to say, write to your representative about so-and-so, find out who your representative is by typing in your postcode. It's all really obvious. It's stuff that should just be freely available and isn't right now. So I think it's a bad situation. So I'm going to switch back to the scraping side of things, getting access to the data. October 2008 was a complete month of pain, because out of the blue, well, as far as we know, out of the blue, aph.gov.au decided to completely change their website that shows the Hansard to make it much better. And we asked, to get an early look at this, because, we were like, we're doing this and everything we're doing is kind of based on the structure of your website because we've had to scrape it and it's like all really painful, like please help us, and like nothing. So finally the thing came live and we looked at it and it actually looked like this, completely different. And we were like, okay, this is going to be really difficult. It turned out, because the entire structure of everything was different, it turned out that none of these pages even were not even valid HTML. It was like the scraping just became like much more painful, when you have tags inside of tags that shouldn't be there, and yeah, anyway. So we were like panicking, or I was panicking, and going, what are we going to do? And it was like, please put the old website back just for a little bit, just for us. And they were like, okay, but we're going to do it. We're going to put it on a private URL because we don't want anybody else to know about it, because that would be an extra thing to support, right? And they were allowing a transition period for people inside Parliament, but not for people outside Parliament, right? So all they were doing were exposing something, a service that they were running internally anyway, just for the outside. Anyway, and so they gave it to us ran it for another week or two, and then there was a break in Parliament for a couple of weeks. And during that time, I kind of worked furiously to try to make it all match up, and I just kept discovering more and more problems. Like text was out of order from the old system to the new system. There was no consistent mapping between headings and subheadings, and like everything was completely like there was some weird kind of magic going on. Like obviously there was a common source of data, but they were presenting it in a way that was utterly different, and I couldn't figure out how then the two, you had the old system and then the underlying data and then the new system, and I couldn't figure out that mapping. And so I just had to try to reverse engineer what their possible logic was in doing stuff. And I got quite far with it, but, ultimately I was hitting barriers where there were things that were just obviously completely wrong, and there was no response to them when I pointed them out, and yeah, anyway. So it was getting really painful. Now, then completely out of the blue, they said, oh, we might have a solution for you. Okay. And what they did is they added that. You say XML. And that was the lifesaver. And basically what they did is they gave us access to the underlying XML data that they used themselves internally to generate both the printed version of the Hansard and the online version, right? And this is something I had asked for months before. And it turned out, I don't know what led them to do this, but I get the inkling that there were a few other groups involved who were wanting something similar, and they ultimately caved in and did this. And in truth is, I'm sure it was incredibly simple to do, but this was actually pretty. This is pretty amazing what they did, right? It's pretty, because what they've done is opened up some really fundamental bit of data and made it a whole lot easier, right? It's far from perfect. Like there's tons of problems with the XML. There's no schema. It's changed. That's a whole nother thing in of itself. But basically, they made a massive step forward with this, and then it was pretty straightforward to basically take that file and rejig it into the XML format that we use, that gets sucked into the database at our end. So there's that. Now, talk a little bit about the Register of Interests. The Register of Interests is, that document that says, what people, what potential things might influence them outside of Parliament that might some undue way influence their decision, right? So people have to say, what memberships of clubs and associations they have, if they've received big gifts from a company, or they've been upgraded from business class to first class on a flight, that they have to declare that stuff. When we started OpenAustralia, we kind of knew that this thing existed, and we were like looking for it online and poking around, and we were like, can't find this thing anywhere. Like, it's just nowhere. And we're like, well, is this crazy? I don't understand. Maybe it's another one of those things where their website isn't being indexed, and I can't find it. But we spent a while looking for it, and then ultimately we got in touch with the registrars, who are the people that look after this thing, and asked if it was available online, and it turned out it wasn't. It wasn't available online, and it wasn't even available in any electronic form. It only existed in an office in Canberra that you could visit like between 10 and 12 and 2 and 4 in the afternoon on days when Parliament sits, and you'd have to go to this office, and there's 1,500 pages of loose leaf A4 paper that had been handwritten filled-in forms, right? That look a bit like this. And that is the official record, right? And that official record is there for everybody to see and to hold everybody accountable to. But if that record isn't like easily available to like normal people, then is that really freely available? I mean, so our aim was, okay, well, how can we put that stuff online? And so we've taken the first step to that, and we got sent the whole lot, 1,500 copies of the 1,500 pages for both the House of Representatives and the Senate, and someone scanned that for us, and we put it all up on the website as PDF split up by person. But here's the thing, we have absolutely no idea what the copyright situation with this document is, nor any licensing situation, right? So basically what happened is we got in touch with the people responsible for this thing. We said, have a look at our website. We run this website called OpenAustralia. We intend to scan this document and put it online for everyone to see. And then they sent it to us, right? And we said, what are the copyright situations? Can we have a license? Blah, blah, blah. Is it okay to republish? Do we have permission? They never answered any of those questions, but they just sent it to us, right? So they sent it to us knowing full well what we were going to do. So we kind of have an implied license there. And the funny thing is I gave a very teeny version of this talk to a bunch of copyright lawyers in a recent conference in Sydney, and they were like, yeah, that's fine. Don't worry about it too much. So, personally, I would like this stuff to work as simply as, using open source software, right? When you get open source software, right, you look at it, you look up a project, and you go to the project page, and then you download the software, and you have the source code for everything, you have the data, and then there's a license that comes with it. It says, okay, this license, this is what I'm allowed to do with this license, and these are my responsibilities to uphold this license, right? So it's telling me everything I need to know. It gives me the data, it says what I have to do, and it says what I'm allowed to do with it. Why can't all government data be as simple as that? And there's no reason it needs to be any more difficult.
Government data in theory is much simpler. It's all public domain.
No. In the US it is. In the US it's all public domain. Here it's not. Here it's Crown copyright. And Crown copyright, they can basically put whatever conditions they want on that data. Now there's some agencies that have been very progressive, and for instance the Australian Bureau of Statistics have recently Creative Commons an enormous amount of their data, right? So you have a very, there's still copyright associated with that, but they've given you a license to use that data in a very specific way under the Creative Commons. But in most cases, with government data, at least in Australia, there's very little in the way of real specific guidance about what you're allowed to do with the stuff.
But you have to cause damage. If you would violate the copyright, but then to have a claim on it, you would have to cause damage. Now, the data's been created for the government by funds provided by taxpayers. It's going to be very difficult for them to bring to court for.
I hope that's the case, but I don't think it's been tested.
I don't think that's the case.
So, the future. Well, say again, I guess what we've done so far is really just a beginning, There's a lot of things happening all over the place in Australia to try to use government data in new and interesting ways, and also try to force government data to be more open. And there's also a big move towards kind of making government more transparent generally. But some of the plans that we have are to add things like voting information, right? Right now, there's no way to find out how people voted in Parliament, right, or how parties voted in Parliament, other than actually looking through the Hansard and looking at the names that said A or no against particular bills, right? Been working on another adaptation of a UK site called the Public Whip, which basically collates all that voting information from the Hansard. And we're about 3/4 of the way through doing that. Like all the parsing stuff is built, and it's just getting the web front end working. And that would basically allow you to, look at how people voted on different bills, kind of group those bills into like policies. So you could say, okay, these whole sets of bills, if someone voted, voted no on this and yes on this and strongly in favor of this and strongly against that, that means that they're in favor of, a strong defense, say. And you can group those things together and then compare whole sets of policies against individual people, right? Now, as I'm sure you're aware, in Australia, like voting is very, 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 very strongly linked to the party that you're in. There's almost no people crossing the floor, right? But I don't know how common that knowledge is, right? But if you can see the information right there that says, you look at your MP and it says, this is when they voted for, along with their party, and this is when the one time that they voted against their party. That will tell you something that there's no easy way to do right now unless you're a complete political junkie, basically. So again, hope to bring something, kind of give people the raw material to make their own decisions, and for people to really figure out what's going on. Like this is really what this is all about.
It's fantastically useful in the UK. I looked at my MP and found that he was in all of the UK Parliament, was the second most likely Labour Party member to vote the party line.
Yep.
There was one vote in his history in Parliament where he hadn't voted as the Whip told him to.
And it tells you something about the politician. It tells you something about the person. It tells you how much they're representing their area versus their party. And all these things are important for you to make the choice about whether those people are really representing you. So committees right now is something like there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on in committees outside of the main chamber that's really important. And probably the best known of those is like the Senate Estimates Committee that's just been going on. And right now we don't have any of that stuff, right? And that would be really good to get in there because that's really important stuff. So we'd like to do that. We'd like to get much better kind of integration with the bills. So you could when people vote on something, you could actually find out how the bills have changed over time and get a sense again, so you could track a particular issue rather than a particular person, So now you can follow what people say, but it'd be really good if you can go, well, I'm interested in the passage of this particular bill about this thing, and I want to see how it progresses, right? And right now, again, you have to be a political junkie to follow that stuff. We want to make it so that anybody can do it really easily. We're focusing on federal parliament right now, but we'd like to get all the states and territories in there. Like we've been seeking permission to republish the Hansard for the states and territories. And right now, the ACT has said yes. WA and Victoria have kind of said yes, though we still have to go to get the official final approval. And the Northern Territory has said no, we're not allowed to republish. And we're appealing the Northern Territory decision, and we have yet to hear back from them. And with the other states and territories, we're still waiting. We've kind of gotten to varying stages. But if you want to follow what's going on, like you can go to our bug tracker, tickets.openaustralia.org, and there's tickets for all that, getting permission for each of the states, and you can follow the updates and if you're interested in that. No, they all have kind of similar concerns about what we're doing. One of the big concerns that kind of keeps cropping up is a thing called privilege, which is basically when things are said in Parliament, they're covered by this notion of privilege. So essentially, people are allowed to say things in Parliament that they wouldn't be allowed to say things outside of Parliament. So it's there to kind of allow for free-flowing discussion without fear that someone would be sued, basically. So there's a really good, valid reason that exists. Now, when you have a transcript of what's said, right, that is covered by privilege as well if certain conditions are met. So if you publish the whole lot, it's covered by privilege. So, and that's basically what we're doing, so we're fine. But like in the case of, if you're a journalist and you're quoting what someone said in Parliament, if that quote is taken out of context, then in a way that sort of, you know, gives a misleading impression of what they said, then it's not covered by privilege. And then the person, I think, yeah, the person republishing it can get into trouble, essentially. So they've been kind of talking about that, and we've gone, oh no, that's not a problem because we're publishing the whole lot. And then they go, oh, why can't you just link to us? And it's like, no, because we're doing this because we want to make it all easier and we want to get the content, and, you know, and that's how we're kind of moving these days. And so there's a lot of explaining. You know, we're not dealing necessarily with tech-savvy people that are making the final decision. So it's just a bit of toing and froing, and I'm fairly confident we'll get there. You know, it's not necessarily easy, and it's very time-consuming. How long has it been that we've been doing the state thing for? Like, it's been longer than that, isn't it? Okay, but well, it's been a good at least 6 months that the whole process has been going on. So, you know, and you can't just kind of put in a request and wait for it to come back. It's just a continual ping them, you know, get through to the right person, annoy them, you know, to the point that they'll answer you and so forth. So, okay, a really big thing we'd like to get going is to add video to everything. So now this is a potentially huge project, but would be absolutely awesome if you could, like, you know, follow what someone says and then not only read the transcript, but just watch what they said in Parliament. So that's a kind of little mock-up of, you know, what it would be like. And there's a bit of, you know, the copyright situation there is unclear. It's a gray area what exactly the rights are in terms of reusing that material. Like, there's fair use, which allows you to take snippets, and, you know, if you're a journalist, you can use things to report the news, and there's a specific part of the Copyright Act, in my understanding, that relates to using something for news, but we don't fit that because we're republishing the whole lot. So the question is, how can we make this happen? It seems, you know, anybody you talk to, it seems really, really obvious that this should be possible, right? Like, we should be allowed to do this, right? It's about what people in Parliament are saying. They're there to represent us. You know, this should happen. So we just need to figure out how. And, you know, there are many ways. And I'm sure, you know, if there was someone from Google that was interested in this, that would be perfect. You know, there's lots of ways in which different organizations could get involved in doing something like this, and it would benefit a lot of different people to have that kind of source of material available for everyone. So just one last thing, and then we'll wrap up. So with the bills, you know, it'd be great if you could, you know, track bills as they progress around. So, you know, you could kind of see them move between houses. You could watch the votes. You could see the amendments happening, or even just, you know, go back to a historical bill and see the progression that goes on. Because right now, if you're a lawyer, even there's like they pay people to specifically track the progression of bills, so that they go, okay, on this date, what did the bill look like, and how did it change over time? And it's very hard in many cases, even for lawyers, to unpick the history of a bill. And right now, so it's like we need version control for bills, right? Basically. So that's it. And that's my Twitter, if you like Twitter. So, any questions?
Sorry, just a first point. In terms of funding and not-for-profit, it certainly sounds like all firms would be very interested. If facility providing
Mm-hmm.
those lawyers or the person that came to answers there. I mean, sorry, it's just
Yeah.
aside. But my main question is, what you focus here is largely transparency in terms of Parliament. I guess the line has been corresponding to the parliamentarian, and assuming she makes the response responses that you get back are often very substantive. And so part of the accountability of parliamentarians is actually to deal with and address public issues and
Yeah.
issues as part of that. Would you look at actually, or have you thought about integrating communications and preferably open communications, collaborative communications?
Yeah. So your question was being concerned about the transparency of the communication with MPs and also the accountability that they have in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, to talk about it, like, perhaps to explain by example, let's say I'm sort of following an issue, say amnesty or something like that. I take the time to write a letter based on profile that they advise, but get back something that is clearly just a, just a rote response on the issue. So from the perspective of public life, it's just registering effectively.
Yeah, I think
On the issue, and
there's a couple of different ways you could look at it, and we'd like to kind of approach both things. There's one effort underway by a completely unrelated group of people to us called Tweet MP, who've set up basically a aggregation engine for tweets from MPs, and also a way to kind of push politicians into using Twitter for the purposes of actually having a transparent form of communication. I think there's a lot of benefit in doing something like that, but I don't think that's the only approach. I think that's that you need to take kind of several strands. And I think the other approach that we'd like to try as well is to build a service where you can easily write to your MP through the website, right? But with one extra thing, right? And that is that you can actually record how often people are either satisfied with the answer or get a reply at all. Right. So and then in that page where we have the statistics about the MPs, you can just show that there. So you don't in any way kind of get in the way of the privacy of that communication, but you in some way make on a statistical level, you make the politician accountable to reply to people and to give them satisfactory answers. And then you can point and someone could write their MP and go, I see on OpenAustralia that most people aren't satisfied with your answer, and I'm not satisfied with your answer. Like, give me, like, I know you're not just conning me, like you're conning a whole bunch of other people. Or alternatively, you find out that your MP is fantastic at replying and that they haven't replied, and okay, there must be something on. I'll deal with them politely and respectfully and wait until that they respond to my query. So I think just that transparency is important on all levels. I think to allow decent communication, decent, intelligent, reasonable communication to take place. Any other questions?
Have you had any response from the people whose words you're taking hands on, politicians?
Have we had any response from the politicians? Yes, we have. It's been very variable though. So the funny thing is, we know, for instance, that an enormous number of people who work at Parliament House or who work for government departments are using our service, right? So we know that, getting email alerts and stuff like that, and one of our blog posts just kind of shows that. And it's a quarter of our email alerts come from gov.au, right? And we've had a fairly sizable communication from people who work in the offices of representatives or senators. But we've had very, very little communication directly from the politicians themselves. In fact, very few politicians right now have actually even publicly recognized what we're doing. Now, I don't know why that is, because we know through a whole bunch of sources that people are using our service, right? Within government, with the the advisors to politicians are using our service, but they're not